All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the latest webinar for Salesforce developers. Hopefully everyone can hear okay and see okay. If you have any issues, please just put something in the chat and we'll have one of our support guys talk to you. My name is Alan O'Connor. I'm a director here for product experience here at Salesforce. And today I'm very excited to bring to you the first of our Building Beautiful App series. Over the next few weeks and months, we'll be talking to a range of partners and industry minds who work in our area about what it takes to build world-class enterprise applications. The series is going to cover everything from a range of topics, from brainstorming ideas to designing to developing to deploying, and even the right way to market your finished apps when they're done. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to cover today. So today is the first part of a 4-part series, as I mentioned, Building Beautiful Apps. And we have some very special guests with us who will be chatting about what's the best thing to do to get from your ideas, but also what you think you need to do before you dive in and start designing and developing. Our guests have been a long-time vendor and partner for Salesforce, and I believe they'll be attending the World Tour event in New York on November 18th. So with that, I'd like to welcome the team from LaunchDM. On the phone, we got creator and founder Rob Wolf, creative director Jason Yackel, creatives Nick Belcher and Adam Schweitzer. Welcome, guys.
Thanks so much, Alan. Yeah, we're excited to partner with Salesforce for this webinar series that is so closely connected with our design consultations that we host in the Dev Zone at Dreamforce and the World Tour events. So as part of this series, we take the same team that you'll be talking with today on the road to San Francisco, New York City, Chicago, and Philly to share ideas on building beautiful apps. So we're going to discuss some awesome topics today and look forward to continuing our conversations if you can catch us at one of the upcoming World Tour events.
Perfect. Sounds good. Of course, as always, before we get started, I do have to mention our safe harbor statement. We are a public traded company, and some of the items you may see here today are a little bit forward-thinking. So for more information about that, please visit our salesforce.com. Also, as you guys may have questions, we are going to do a Q&A at the end, but you don't have to wait till the end if you don't want to. Support will be answering questions as we go along, as we are, and we will be keeping and tackling more of those questions live with Launch and myself, time allowing at the end of the webinar. So with that, why don't we get started and get in? So Rob, one of the biggest questions we both get every year at Dreamforce and some of the World Tour events is, how do you guys design and build enterprise applications? They ask us what our process is and kind of what's our secret sauce to success.
Yeah, that is probably the most common question we get. And although we're going to go through the beginning processes of building a beautiful app today in more detail, it all starts with the idea and defining the target audience. And we define that during an ideation session involving a lot of brainstorming with whiteboards, pencil sketches, and considering the good ideas and throwing out the bad ones. Once we dial in the idea and it aligns with our target audience, we create the design, UI, UX to give the best experience for the users. Yeah. And before all this, you need to assemble your team and make a solid plan for the whole process with all your roles and responsibilities defined. So often you may think it requires a huge team to build typical enterprise apps, and really normally you can build apps with a core team of 5 to 7 total with designers, developers, and project managers. So you have your idea, you have your team assembled, the scope's been approved, and now it's time to consider devices, OSs, and user experiences throughout the design and build. So this is critical for any successful app deployment. Yeah. And another thing we always talk about up front is support. So just to conclude a little process here, if you haven't given thought to post-go live support, then your idea really isn't ready yet. So support's super critical. So yeah, not sure if we unleashed our secret, but hopefully we got close.
Yeah. I want to drill into something you said there to start, this idea of, the idea in general. Where and how do you guys kind of come up with your ideas? Are they natural? Do you kind of set time aside, etc.? What do you guys do as a business?
Well, that's another good one, Alan. Ideas are coming from 2 sources. It's an internal idea which comes from your own team or manager, which is more of a homegrown approach from your culture and your knowledge, or it comes from a client or a third party. So regardless of where the idea source is coming from, it all starts with that idea that's useful to your target audience. So refining and making sure the idea is solid, and as we say, a lot of times future-proofed. That's the first and most important part of building an app from the ground up. And after that, everything else will snowball in from there.
Yeah, can you ever see that ideas can be too complex or too big? I know sometimes we have business leaders and CEOs who want us to dream very large, but do you ever find it can be too big or complex?
Absolutely. It's more often than not. So we like to say to not overdo it when you are coming up with those initial ideas. Be sure that you can dedicate the team's attention to the core idea without diluting other features that are quote unquote cool, but not so effective and possibly expensive and trendy. Be true to your original ideas, because if not, it can really be detrimental to the success of your app. So with that said, clients usually get bigger or more complex ideas even as the app's getting built. So many times it's smart to stick with plan A because of timing and budget reasons. However, in some cases, with reasonable clients, and I'll stress the word reasonable there, if the team collectively thinks that it's a better approach and is minimally invasive from a time and budget perspective, then we normally greenlight those newer ideas. They make sense.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. At the end of the day, you don't want something to completely change in direction or whatever it may be. You have to be agile enough to kind of evolve, etc. Nick, we've seen a lot of great ideas in the past, but one thing I've often seen is they get stalled, and I think mainly because before teams dive in, they're not really taking the time to ask the right questions. They haven't really flushed it out properly the way it should have been done. What kind of advice would you give here to developers, especially who are in small teams, about taking the right steps to ensure that they ask all those right questions?
Right. So around the idea of the app, there needs to be a lot of questions answered even before jumping in and deciding how that app is going to work or how it's going to look, all of those details. You need to decide if there's a necessity for the app. Did that idea come from a basic need of some sort? Maybe you just came up with something one day and said, hey, it'd be totally awesome to make an app that does this. Maybe that idea is to have an app that allows you to, order food to your door. So determining that there's that need for the app is really important. And then after determining that there's that need and necessity, you need to determine if your app idea has competitive advantages over, similar apps already on the market. Maybe there's an app on the market already that allows you to get food delivered from, say, 8 different restaurants in your area. And your app will allow you to order any restaurant in the area. I'm not saying that that's necessarily an app that could actually happen, but for the sake of touching on, the competitive advantages, I think that scenario illustrates it pretty well. And then at this stage, you may also want to start thinking about what devices you want the app to be built for. And deciding on that doesn't have to be concrete at this point, but it's definitely something you might want to start thinking about.
Yeah, you're really kind of touching on for example, the differentiators that are kind of going to, make you stand out from the crowd and stand out from, especially if someone else has already kind of started what you're doing, which is normally the case because people are so good at developing and designing these days at pace. You're starting to kind of touch on this idea of research, Nick. How important is research to you guys for in the process, but also the market and product side of it, both sides of it?
Researching is really important. I mean, making sure you're checking out the market and seeing what else is out there is probably the second most important part after the initial idea. Determining if there are, other similar products out there and where their strong and weak points are can steer the direction of your project a lot. It's important that if your app's going to be similar to something already out there, you need to fill a void that's been left by the competitors. You need to make sure your app has advantages over the rest when it comes to meeting the audience needs. And you can achieve this by doing that research involved and not rushing the process. Maybe your app's the first of its kind and that's awesome, but in that case, you want to make the app the best it can be first and try not to leave that void that a future competitor could fill.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense in that sense. Jason, one of the things I've seen a lot of people do, they'll do their market research and they'll do other things and they'll set up the process, but they sometimes, make mistakes. What kind of mistakes have you seen customers make even though they kind of thought they've set up the process correctly?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest mistakes we see is customers not having a solid game plan from the beginning of their project. Many clients come to us with a great idea for an app. They want us to build it out. But once we start brainstorming and asking questions, we start to uncover a lot of details that they haven't completely thought through. And that's totally part of the process. During our brainstorming sessions, a lot of questions come up like, what devices and operating systems will the app run on? What features do you want the app to have? And are all the features necessary for the initial launch of the app? Everyone wants all the bells and whistles in the app for the initial launch, but you have to be realistic with expectations. Most apps are a work in process. You want to make sure essential functions work well first, and then add on additional features and or device support for future releases. For example, you may have to focus specifically on one type of device or operating system for the initial release, but then down the road you can add additional devices for future release.
It's like focus on the main ones on go first. That we talked about there before the process. What kind of other mistakes have you seen customers make, when they're building and designing, but kind of outside of that build and design process, kind of further down that they should be aware of even while they're building and designing it?
Right, and I mean, that's a really good question because right from the beginning you want to think about designing and developing, but you also need to start thinking about marketing and support. You have to know how you're going to get your app in front of your customers. Marketing is a huge hurdle for most companies. You can't just throw the app out there and to the public and hope they'll find it. You have to guide people to your app and convince them that it's going to change their lives, make them more efficient, make their jobs easier. You also have to think about supporting the app once it's launched. No matter how well you test your app or how much documentation you provide to your customers, questions and problems are going to come up. You need to have a solid plan in place for support and to answer questions and solve problems when they happen. Good planning is essential for a smooth running project. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Adam, Jason kind of mentioned and touched on this idea of brainstorming, which is something I'd like to go a little bit deeper on. How do you guys brainstorm, and what kind of works best for you guys when you're going through these different processes?
Well, first off, we find that inviting our whole team into brainstorming sessions rather than just like a creative department is hugely helpful. That's because everybody can throw out ideas that are relevant and usable to a project. Those people are also going to be bringing in a different perspective from different kinds of potential users, and that perspective is going to be critical to the overall process. An idea that was once thought to be great initially actually might not be as good of an idea as it was once thought to be, because if no one from that user group understands it, then it's not any good. It's not going to reach them. Secondly, you have to really actually write down all of your ideas, no matter how crazy they may seem. Write them all down on a whiteboard, a chalkboard, sticky notes, good old-fashioned sketchbooks with pens and pencils, whatever works best for you and your team. I know here at LaunchDM we're not drawing in our own personal sketchbook. We use a giant whiteboard in our main conference room for this type of stuff constantly. I mean, it's never blank. But whatever you use, just make sure that everybody can see it also as these ideas are being written down, because a lot of these ideas lead to really awesome strategies later on. One idea that might not seem as feasible now could potentially be really feasible later on down the line, or at the very least it could spark another idea for someone else later on down the line.
I know what you mean. I know here at Salesforce, we have the walls that you have to draw on and those sort of things as well. I've seen our own teams here at Salesforce when they're doing brainstorming sessions, when they're building new products, etc. And the rooms that they take over have pretty much been covered in sticky notes. One of the things that the teams sometimes struggle with, and I feel like it doesn't matter if you're a designer, a developer, or a PM, is like, which ones, how do you prioritize? You know, it's always an issue how to prioritize, and kind of, how do you guys decide on which ones to pursue?
Yeah, I mean, our rooms are covered in sticky notes too. I mean, we go through tons of sticky notes and whiteboard markers. It's we all have different processes that we like to follow those, really hash out those ideas. And figure out which ideas to pursue is an essential part of the brainstorming process. Once you have your ideas written down on whiteboards, sticky notes, etc., you need to sort through them and figure out which ones you should move forward with and which ones you need to just scrap. You need to identify the necessary features you want to have in your app. These are your must-haves, the ideas that no matter what have to be in your app. Your primary ideas that can't be removed from the project, the features your app just can't possibly function without. After that, you'll want to identify secondary features. We call them the nice-to-have. Features that you'd really like, but depending on time and budget, you might not be able to offer them in the first phase. Some ideas just have to wait for future releases, and some simply won't make the cut.
And it's interesting the way you put that, because, you know, we're always looking at kind of what I call tier 1 and tier 2 features, and, you know, we look at phases 1 and phase 2, etc. But, you know, even those ones, the ones that are nice to have, what do you guys do with the rest of the ideas that don't make it above the line? Like, for example, do you use them later on, or do you store them, or you just throw them away?
So among those ideas that didn't make that list for, you know, phase 1 or the initial launch, there's some that are going to be so far off the wall that they're just not going to work in your app. And a lot of teams find it easiest to get those out of the way first, just so they're not cluttering up the notes. You don't want to really throw them away. I mean, just kind of file them away for your future reference. You never know what's going to come over from those leftover ideas. So by putting some of the exciting ideas in your back pocket, it leaves the opportunity to reference them for future ideas, as well as possibly giving you a jumping off point for another project. And you never know what might spark another idea. So as Adam touched on earlier, if someone sees one of the ideas you threw up there and they need some ideas on how to put another project together, whether that be within your team or for a client, it can be beneficial for that in the future. Some ideas are good enough to keep for the phase 2 of the app, and maybe you want to plan for some sort of revamp and make your app a little more robust down the line. Some ideas will spawn into totally new app ideas. But either way, it's important to never be afraid to discuss all ideas, no matter how crazy or bad they may seem, because your team's going to have to decide whether or not those ideas are going to be useful towards your target audience, or if the idea may be needed for a totally different audience.
Yeah, and that's interesting as well, because I know one of the things that I do a lot with the teams that we're working with is, you know, we'll be working kind of in an agile kind of way. We'll end up taking a lot of, you know, screenshots on our phone or photos on our phone of the whiteboards and different sticky layouts as we have, because it's pretty hard sometimes to store those. Hell, we've even used them for patents further down the line. I want to focus a little bit on what I'm going to call, you know, audiences or user flows. You know, you mentioned target audiences or personas. How important are these for you guys when, you know, deciding the direction of the product, and kind of why are they important?
Yeah, defining a target audience is going to really dictate the direction of the entire project and the success of the app. You know, asking yourself, so what are the needs and the solutions for those needs? And then, you know, what are the solutions to the different types of audiences that are going to think and interact with the app in different ways? You have to carefully consider how that audience is going to interact. So there's instances where you might have a few different types of target audiences and need to build one app that can cater to those multiple types. So in place of building an app per audience, you can intelligently guide the type of user through an app with solid UI, hierarchy, and even authentication. So, so say, Alan, for example, you know, you might have a customer also be a partner and also be a vendor. So when they interact with your app, you need to have ways of sending them down the proper path to accomplish their unique goals, you know, based on who they are. So, you know, constantly giving them what they want as seamlessly as possible is how we really summarize that up.
Yeah, and that makes, that's the way I kind of look at it. It's funny, like Mark Benioff, our CEO here at Salesforce, spoke this year at Dreamforce about, the internet customers and how our customers are everywhere today. How they interact with products and services via everything, phones, tablets, the iWatches, whatever it may be. How do you guys decide, the devices and platforms to focus on with those user flows?
Yeah, I mean, user flows and how the users are going to be interacting with and using the app plays a huge role. So if the app only has a very quick and easy function for users that are maybe constantly on the go, the app should probably be built for, like you said, say a smartwatch or a smartphone. I mean, let's be honest, who doesn't have their phone on them at all times? Or say on the opposite end of the spectrum, if the app is a little more robust and needs more focused interaction, then developing for maybe a tablet would probably be a better solution for that. But catering to how your target user is going to be accessing and interacting with the app should certainly be first on your list. After that, determining what kind of functionality the app is going to have will also play a part in what devices or platforms it's going to be built on. But as long as you're still catering to the general flow of your target user, that's the key. So for instance, if an app is going to be for helping people find a restaurant in the area quickly and easily, that app would probably be better suited just on a smartphone. But if the app is going to be for, say, helping a sales department or a sales manager track sales pitches, then something that complex and robust would probably be better suited for a tablet.
Yeah. I know, I see a lot of our sales guys that will be using that. They use the tablets almost more than the phone sometimes, especially when they're on the road, etc. I know you guys have been a long-term vendor and partner with Salesforce, and you guys have seen our platform change through its different times. How important is building on the Salesforce App Cloud platform for you guys, especially when you're building these applications for all these kind of different range types, etc.?
It's really important. I mean, building on the App Cloud platform is great. It's important for us to be able to integrate ours and our customers, CRM data and Salesforce instances easily and quickly.
Yeah.
And the App Cloud's a pretty perfect platform for that. It allows us to build any app we want and utilize it on the device types we talked about earlier. In perfect Salesforce fashion, it makes it easy for us to build and manage these apps fast and seamlessly integrate that data we need to. So whether that be employee to employee within an enterprise or an outward-facing app that connects the company with its customers, the App Cloud has become kind of a pivotal asset in successfully building and managing, deploying, and streamlining that whole process for us.
Yeah, and then, it's one of those things I think that it really does work when, the key there is, being able to link that data, etc. So I kind of want to switch gears here, guys, for a second. We've talked about how we collaborate, figure out the best ideas, research it, and kind of identify those key users and flows, etc. And then I think, one of the things I see a lot of people do is, especially developers and small teams, they'll just dive straight into code, for example. But what else do you guys do about going about setting up for success just before you, dive in and start designing or developing?
Yeah, I mean, as a designer, I always want to start designing right away. But there's a few steps you need to take before you start designing the app. At this point, you should know all the features that your app is going to have, or at least the features that you want it to have. Now you need to structure the app in a logical way. You need to start by mapping out a user flow and creating wireframes for the app. By defining a user flow, your team is able to map out exactly how the users will navigate through the app. Personally, I think it's easiest to sketch the user flow on a whiteboard or even a piece of paper or Post-it notes. Using a whiteboard makes it really easy to sketch out your thoughts, draw arrows to show the user flow, make quick changes to the layout, and add simple notes when you need to. Wireframes are a quick, easy way to visually see the framework of your app. With the wireframe, you're defining page layouts and arranging the app's content, user interface elements, and navigation. Once your wireframes are complete, your team can use them as guidelines for designing the app.
Cool. One of you talk about like companies like Salesforce, for example. I don't know what the most people on the phone and the developers we have on the phone, if they're in small or large teams, but I feel like working in a large team can get quite complicated, especially when it comes to like design consistency and build consistency, etc. What advice would you give to companies that, for example, have those large teams and want to keep things a lot more consistent both in the apps that they're designing and building?
Yeah, I mean, consistency is a huge priority for us. Without consistency, your app can feel disjointed, like you're using different apps for different functions. We like to start the design process by creating a style guide, which documents the look and feel of the app. It outlines what fonts and colors we're using, what buttons are going to look like, what the navigation looks like. Once you have this style guide created, you have to make sure your entire team is following it during the design process and the development process. You want to make sure everybody is on the same page, especially with a large team. You have a lot of different hands touching the app during the design development process, which can lead to a lot of inconsistencies.
Adam, Jason just talked about consistency. What advice or aspects of the UI do you think are most important in terms of that consistency for the user experience?
Yeah, definitely. For us, things like hierarchy and calling out elements that are more significant than others, to build a hierarchical pyramid of sorts throughout the app. The ease of use and how easy is it to navigate the app, important elements that are prominent and easy to find, minimizing the number of clicks or taps to navigate through the app makes things easier also. Color palette and overall consistency are really big ones too. Picking out a strong color palette with 2 to 3 key colors and sticking to those colors, or at least tints of those colors, is going to help keep the app's branding feel consistent. Things also like keeping margins the same and sticking with just a few text styles throughout the app will also help keep things really consistent as well.
And recently Salesforce launched our new Lightning design system. Has this changed or helped you guys deliver these consistent enterprise experiences in any way?
Oh yeah, it definitely has. Having such a strong base to build apps from makes our job a lot easier. We mentioned consistency before and how big of a part that is. The Lightning design system builds in a lot of that consistency for you right off the bat. So when building something as complex as an app, you can imagine a strong structural framework can really go a long way in how well the app functions for the end user. So it really has changed the way apps are being built and how they function. Obviously, all for the better. Our entire team is extremely excited to see Salesforce stepping up and creating such a robust system. It's really going to be making our lives a lot easier in the future.
And that's cool. So what other tools do you guys use when designing?
We use a lot of tools like, obviously, Photoshop and the rest of the Adobe suite, mainly to create text styles and color palettes while we're designing an app. That's really a really big key part of the actual physical construction of the UI and the UX of the app. Having a style guide of sorts solidified as a foundation for when you're designing additional pages and extensions of the app, you already have those text styles then to reference and to use. So that's really, really key. Very often, actually in the design process is communication and how that's handled. Being able to communicate quickly and efficiently with the rest of your team, even if they're in a different state, break project deadlines. And we all know in the app building business, deadlines are everything. So to help make this process quicker and easier, we use a lot of things like Trello, email, and even good old-fashioned conference calls to communicate and send important documents back and forth to each other. Some members of our team actually are on the opposite side of the country from us, but by using these techniques of communication, we're still able to communicate with them quickly and efficiently.
Yeah, and I know it comes extremely important when you have a lot of remote employees or contractors abroad. Rob, I want to switch gears here and just talk about user experience, how it's starting to transform how businesses look at design. What is it about user experience right now that's so important?
Yeah, creating an elegant user experience as opposed to a painful one, leads to success or failure. And that's all based on, a good fluid user experience. We always say a good UX isn't noticed. If it's noticed, it's normally creating confusion or headaches for your logical next steps. Good UX to the user should be thoughtless, and the navigation should be how it's expected to be. You almost have to dig into the psychology of your user base and arrange the UI to react to their next logical steps. And it's really important to put your users first, as we've said many times throughout this webinar. And when designing and developing apps, many companies make a mistake when they want it to be more about what they're offering rather than what the user really needs. So the more your app caters to your user base, the more successful it will be.
Yeah, that's true. Any other final advice you would give to developers, that tuned in today?
Yeah, well, as you pointed out, Alan, user experience is changing how businesses look at design because customers interact with businesses. And as we're all customers at some level, and we're all interacting with top-notch user experiences on our devices every day. And they're getting better, way better every day. So regardless of the OS, the device, or the platform your app is built on, we expect easy, effective, meaningful interfaces. So when it comes to an app's goal and needs from the target audience, be interested and not interesting.
Cool. Well, I think that's pretty much it there for today, but I'd like to run through just, what we've covered. In this first series, we talked about the idea, the questions that you need to ask and what you need to do. We kind of looked at a little bit on, the market outlook, the research that your team needs to do. What is the need for that application that you're thinking about building? We also talked about brainstorming, and the collaborating with your teams and getting as many people involved as possible. What are the core features? What can be done in time? What's above the line and below the line, and really kind of affecting where the set of features that you want to build out are going. And we talked about target audiences and devices, defining those personas, defining those user flows, and really nailing down that user experience across, these devices and different platforms that your users are going to use. And we finally touched on, the idea of best practices, things that you should focus on for the user, things that you need to keep consistent, and everything else. And of course, this is, as I said, this is the first in our series that are upcoming. This is called The Idea. In the next part of the series, we'll be talking about design principles and more on UX and UI best practices that you need to do when designing and developing this. In part 3, we'll talk about designers and developers joining forces. We'll be deep diving into, Scrum technologies, but also kind of more about what the platforms that we build on, the technologies that we use, and how we build. So, for example, we touched on the Lightning design system today. And in part 4, then, once we build our applications, we'll be talking about deploying and marketing your apps. No matter how good of an application you build, you got to make sure that you sell it the right way and market it. And there we'll have some of our members from our marketing teams and evangelist teams speak to that. Of course, this is an ongoing series. It's the first time we've done it from a design aspect for you guys, our Salesforce developer community. So we'd love to hear your feedback about what you thought about the series today, and of course, any other ideas that you feel that you'd like us to discuss in, the upcoming parts or beyond. Of course, as well, we want to make sure that we mention out that we have a World Tour event that's happening in the Convention Center in New York. It's happening on Wednesday, November 18th. And we'd love you guys to register for free and come down. I know Rob and the team will be there along with myself, so feel free to pop along to the Dev Zone and learn more and get hands-on with the actual technologies and even speak some of the design consultations that we're running. Before we wrap up, I'd love to take some time and maybe go through some of the questions and answers I know you guys have been posting in the chat windows on the webinar. So why don't we guys dive into a couple of those? So I see here one of the first ones we see is, the question is, please share the tools and techniques and methodologies for capturing requirements, including the role of use cases, storyboards, mock-ups, and prototypes. Which one of you guys want to take this one?
I'll take that, Alan. This is Nick. So As far as like role of use cases, user testing can be, a pretty good technique for kind of capturing the requirements you may need for the app. You can do that in kind of the beginning stages of development. You could do that, kind of more in the brainstorming side of things as well. It kind of depends on, how strong that idea is and how much you want to push that at that time. I mean, it could happen where, you have your idea, but you don't really know exactly how you're going to pull it off. So user testing in the beginning might be a good idea. Whereas you might build something that's cool and then you want to user test it with, to make sure it's functioning the way you want. And then as far as like mock-ups and prototypes, we typically use Photoshop to lay out and decide on our UI, UX, and user flows and things like that. Once we kind of start designing them, we start designing for different screens and for buttons and the overall general flow of the app.
Yeah. Another one here that one of the communities asked is, can you give an example of an idea from which it came from the team and how it was converted into an app, ultimately?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. A lot of ideas that come about to us are normally out of a need basis. Recently, we give a lot of presentations to potential clients, and there really wasn't a good way to work offline and give those presentations through an iPad, especially. So we put together an app that runs offline, a sales presentation app that for your team in the field can give presentations, record as you're presenting. So it all comes about by from a need that we had actually internally. Yeah, that's how they come about to us. Is it's something that
it's like make life easier in the way. One of our devs here also says, a question around involving all team members. I work in a relatively small company, and the app's built here in-house for use. We don't really have a UI UX team. In this case, what are some recommendations for involving someone to help brainstorming from a UX perspective? Would you involve someone who used the app in a team, for example?
Yeah, this is Adam. I can take that one. You could definitely have prospective users come in on brainstorming sessions. We definitely encourage that. So you're really not going to get in the head of your target audience unless you're, having them in to talk to them firsthand and have them interact with your app if you have something working already. You're just not going to gain that knowledge unless you do that. Yeah, it's definitely also a good idea to have a prospective just designer in general, a UI UX expert come on board and just really shed their knowledge on whatever app you're building. UI UX experts are they're going to know all of the little things here and there that are ultimately really going to come together and make or break an app. They're going to be the difference between an app that's clunky and doesn't function well to something that's really smooth and works flawlessly. So, it's definitely a good idea to have some kind of a designer come in and do some consulting.
Yeah, I even really like the idea of that, even if it's not designers, but outsiders coming in as well, because you have this idea that they're looking at it from a fresh perspective in a way. I know we've done that in the past as well with you guys, for example. Okay, let's take one more. How do you help guide business folks who don't really know what they want? I love this question. It speaks to, executives tend to flip-flop, etc. How do you guys how do you guys advise this when people are still not sure exactly what they want? They just have a general idea and can't really focus on a direction.
So it all kind of just depends on the initial idea and the thoughts behind that idea, really. I mean, do they at least have an idea of what they want to achieve? Because that's probably most important. Guidance and kind of consulting along the way for those people that don't really know what they want can always be finessed over time. I mean, sometimes, like as, you know, UI, UX experts and designers, we have to kind of put our foot down and say, hey, this should really work this way, or, you know, you maybe show them the opposite perspective, you know, try and show them the user's perspective. Maybe they're not going to feel comfortable with this flow, and show them why that flow feels more comfortable. In most cases, they're not sure exactly what they want, so showing them some options and explaining the importance of your decisions can really help guide them along the way. So, I mean, it can kind of go, you know, two different ways. I mean, they could have a great idea and path on the way that they want to go, or, you know, they could not really know what they want and need that extra guidance. So you kind of have to push that guidance on them in some cases.
Yeah, as you say, you need to force a decision at some stage to get it done. All right, guys, I think that's good. I think we'll leave it there. But I want to first of all thank you guys for taking the time out of your day and really speaking to this idea of the first part of this series and getting involved with it. I also want to thank everyone who tuned in today, all the developers we have. Of course, I'm going to, as I mentioned before, if you guys have any feedback on the session itself, please post on the link that we have in the slides here, but also on the actual community forums on developer.salesforce.com. We have recorded a session, and we will post it there. We'll also mail it out to everyone who did attend today, so feel free to share and tweet and move it on. And as I said, thank you very much. So with that, we'll leave it, and we'll contact everyone soon with our second one that's coming up in early December. Thank you. Bye-bye.